we'll begin maybe kind of at the beginning. And I was interested to read that in an interview we had with the National Gallery, that in respect to the question of how come you became an artist in the first place, you had mentioned that you were encouraged by the principal and some of your teachers at the high school, that they were impressed by your drawing, and that more to that, you were inspired by the Romantic poets and William Blake. You want to talk about that?
Yes. Actually, it all started too quite early. When Christmas time, like which we were at this time, the nuns in elementary school would always give me the entire blackboard to draw the nativity. I wish I have some photographs of it, but I've lost them. I was going to show them to you, and if I do, I will share them with you. And that's how it all started as well as in high school, certain teachers. And now, having jumped to a different angle here, could you repeat your question about
how come you became an artist? And I'm curious about the processes that you described.
Okay. When I was a student at McGill, I had gone there from University of Manitoba to study art history. And I took a filler, a painting course, and there was a certain Professor Dews, an English professor. And this was a period when the course lasted from September to April. And one of our assignments was to paint, give an interpretation of love. Yeah, I was 22, 23, and I searched high and low just to find out what love was about. Of course, I didn't. I'd had a lot of, I wouldn't call that affairs, but I've had a lot of, and I went to 4 different graduations for 4 different girlfriends. Gives you an idea, anyways, make story short, I thought and thought about it. What am I going to do? Interestingly enough, at that time I was studying beadwork design by a woman, an ethnologist, ethnographer, hired by the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington. Her name is Elizabeth Lyford. And there were this book of many different quill work and beadwork designs, and I was fascinated. A lot of geometry, and of course I was fascinated with Frank Stella, geometric paintings at this time. And I would come to class like around, this started in September, and around November, because we were supposed to by December come up with a plan. And I knew that I didn't have a plan as in terms of what I thought love was. But I looked at my classmates, and Indiana, The Hearts by Jasper Johns, and all of those people that were dealing with pop culture, and I was only a few years away from my reserve. I was raised first of all, in a residential school from grade 1 to grade 8 on the reserve, and we didn't have a TV, we were very poor, and so I was not exposed to urban life at all, or television for that matter. So I had no idea. But when I saw that, I couldn't jive, I couldn't react to my classmates' submissions. I came in with some of the sketches that I had done that appropriated some of the geometric designs from the Lyford book. And that's a start, is with my argument, also not knowing what it was on the assignment. But I said, I'm working on it. January comes along and I'm beginning to be anxious because beginning of April I have to hand in an assignment. So I started doing at least 4 different acrylic paintings using the same geometric patterns. One of them was eventually I submitted to an exhibition in Hotel Bonaventure in Montreal, and the exhibition was organized by the Canadian Guild of Craft. of Aboriginal artifacts. And I submitted my paintings, 3 of them, and they accepted them. And I sold one of them, a small one, and $90. It was called Red is Beautiful. At that period already I liked color. Didn't think anything of it. The ethnologist, Ted Brasser, at the Museum of Man at that time, bought it, sold it $90. I said, wow, you know, maybe I can make a living out of this. Didn't really think seriously about it, but it was an opening, and that was part of that. And then now came April to submit work, and I really thought about it. I submitted. I made one more painting, so that would have been 4. I submitted them to Professor Jules, and then I said, but I had a dream. And I said, I can't pay. Well, don't you know what love is? He said, no, not really. But I said, I had a dream. And I'm telling you the truth. I had a dream because I was getting really worked up and getting nervous. I wanted a mark. I wanted a good mark. I had been working at it conceptually, you know, culturally, even sort of emotionally, trying to find it. You know, but I had this dream of a canvas. Triptych. It was blue, purple, and red, a triptych. And I eventually found out, being interested in color, that you arrive at purple by mixing those 2 opposite colors. And so I had a long discussion with the professor, and he gave me a good mark. But I said, can you paint it? Are you going to paint it? Are you going to submit it? And I said, no, because I don't really know. But I will present a painting, make another one, but only with the primary colors. But that will take shape, you know. And that was in 1974, 75. From that dream, I painted this painting for One Bedford 2 years ago. I finally painted it because I knew what love was, you know, and also at that time, having sold a $90 painting, acrylic painting, small one, and I could never really tell anybody that I was an artist, or I wanted to be an artist, or I was going to be an artist. The idea was there. It wasn't until that dream, and I remember that dream to this day too. But in my culture, dreaming is an important part of affirmation with things. For me, from that moment on, and after talking with my professor, I was able to confidently, without feeling any hesitation, any embarrassment, and said, I'm an artist. And then what happened after that, and it led to that, a former girlfriend from University of Manitoba, Winnipeg now, she was then at that time Dean of Women, and I told her about this sharing stuff. And I said to, she sent me 13 poems that she's written. Her name is Brenda Goreshko. She lives in Vancouver now. And I painted 12 of these paintings, still in geometric, still the Lyford designs, the Ojibwe designs, but they were all in pastel colors. So that was the first time that poetry began to play a major role in stimulating an inner emotion. And then once the emotion was activated, I tried to articulate that visually through what I had been working with. So I made 12 of them because one of the poems is only one word, and the 13th one, and I said, well, I can't really do that. All of those paintings, 75, 76, were bought by Indigenous Affairs at that time, Indian Affairs at that time, and they're all there in Ottawa. They've never been published. They're all pastel colors. A couple of them are in teepee shape, And that particular pattern actually, the shape of the canvas actually came from Jericho by Barnett Newman. Because I was, I was a young artist, and then eventually in the late 70s, by the time I left Montreal, 76, 77, 77, I became aware of Yves Goucher's work, and that's where my pastel colors came about as well. By the time I left Montreal, I was totally fascinated with Mondrian, because I was getting closer and closer to the... I didn't really like the plasticien, that was not for me. But I liked the style. There was something idealistic, there was something pure about it for me. And it took me until 81 when I went to Amsterdam to a serious study on Mondrian. By that time I was very mature. I had exhibitions here in Toronto. I realized that I had a problem with Mondrian. When I looked at a good volume of his work, I went to The Hague. It's the absence of organic line, and being an indigenous person, organic lines are very, very important, and green, and brown. And so, I left him, of course, and I became more and more attracted to Barnett Newman again. And that was a result from looking at Cathedra. Here I am at The Hague, looking at the Mondrians, and just fascinated with the way the paint is applied, because you can see the brushwork. It's not all like a plasticien, it's a roller. No, it was fascinating, but then I kept getting attracted on this side, and I turned around, and there's this, as long as this room, these two rooms, Cathedra by Newman. And I said, okay, fine. That's how I started, through a dream. And dreaming will continue to take a role in my process, in my maturity as a painter.
That's interesting, Robert. So I'm tempted to ask, what do you think an artist can do? But as I hear you speak, it occurs to me that maybe an answer to that, and I don't want to anticipate, but maybe an answer to that is that at least one important thing an artist can do is to reveal the imagination through dreams or through the sensitivity that one has to something like love. Would that characterize your thoughts about what an artist can do?
It was very interesting. I've never really considered myself a romantic in a sense. I am intellectually, because of the as in your first question about I mean, when I was at the University of Manitoba, I took a course on romantic painters, studied all the Shelley, Byron, and John Donne, Milton. Full gamut, read out their poetry. This was a course, a full course. And I became really fascinated. What would happen to me if I read and Blake, William Blake? I was attracted to him as well, because he was one of the closer ones whereby, as I would read the prose, images would manifest themselves in my brain, and I really liked that. Whereas with other poets like John Donne, the imagery wouldn't be as obvious or as bombastic or as emotional, but the prose would be more elegiac. There would be a lot more emotional, a lot more. It wouldn't be specific. It wouldn't be specific imagistically, but it would be specific emotionally. And it would always contain a narrative.
This leads to an obvious question, which is hard for me to frame. So I'm going to suggest something rather perhaps overly generalized, but it occurs to me from the way you've been speaking about the interest that you've had that there does seem to be emerging here, for me, a sense of a conversation between the Western paradigms that these poets and painters represent, and the Salto traditions that, of course, have so much meaning for you.
Mm-hmm.
Would a conversation between these seem an adequate way of describing the relationship that you see as one of your core interests or core concepts?
It wasn't obvious at that time. I was too busy absorbing everything that was happening to me. I was too busy aligning myself with various aesthetics, with various artists as well, and what they did and what I liked and what I didn't. It's not so much what I didn't like, it was so much like what did not trigger a core, you know. And I've learned that over the years. Now when I go to an exhibition, a group exhibition, let's say, or a large exhibition, an exhibition of certain works would resonate. They would leave a memory, you know, and they would constantly resurface in my mind, in my memory. And I would consider, that work would play a major role, and I would make serious, I would do serious thinking about them, where it came from, what it meant, how I related to it. And at this time, it was Western aesthetics that were the most, important. And not because I was not familiar with the aesthetics on my as a child. I was raised very traditional. I have a traditional name, George Kobines, Dishin Congo. I am known as Blue Thunder. You know, it has taken up until 5-6 years ago to be able to tell anyone that, because the residential school forbid me to use that name, because my first day of school, in residential school, I had no idea my name was Robert. And so it became, you know, something that I held. I didn't really hold it back, because I'm obviously informed through dreaming. You know, I would wake up in the morning with my brothers. I'm the eldest in the family. My mother would, in the kitchen table, large kitchen, large family. She would be at the stove cooking our eggs for everybody. Everybody had different tastes for the eggs. I liked mine sunny side up. I had a brother. My brother liked many eggs, 3 or 4, and he liked them scrambled. The first thing she would say as she was cooking, and we were all sitting around and we would try to beat each other, because she would ask, "Kiki ba chigena? Did you dream?" So that was the beginning of the day as a child. So dreaming became absolutely an important part of life, of understanding life, of knowing what was happening. What was happening in your dreams, what you saw in your dreams, who you met in your dreams. It all became really, and became sort of culturally pertinent to be able to not so much analyze your dreams, but see them as narratives, as stories that you know. And so I've done that all my life, so it's there. And also being a speaker, that's in my family. When I go home, my siblings, we all speak our maternal language, Soto. And so I was never afraid that my identity was Sure, I felt it was under attack or was being suppressed, but I was never insecure about it. It was always there, because every time I went home for the weekend, every time I went home once a month, and I was in Montreal, at University of Manitoba. In Montreal, I went home every Christmas, celebrate with family. So it never really became, we'd go to the Sundance on the summer solstice. And that's where things really began to be very difficult for me, and actually made me very angry for years. And I didn't realize that until 2009, when I did the 24 drawings that I did of my residential school abuse, trauma. Again, using memory to articulate what had happened to me. But going back to a particular story, I was 16 years old. Again, the family would put up a tent at the sacred grounds of on our reserve, where the Sundance lodges were built. And after the Sundance is over, they only take the outer rim, the ribs of the lodge, and they leave a pole in the middle. So you see them everywhere, so you know this is sacred ground. Anyways, next story short, this particular summer, my cousins and we all decided that there was going to be a ceremony. We all found out that there was going to be a ceremony. It's like Kiwizagaba, and they were going to have piercing. So we stayed up. And they couldn't do that during the daylight because of the RCMP. So it was done around 5 in the morning, just as the sun is coming out. And so no one's really around except the participants and the guests. We stayed up. We couldn't go in the lodge, so we would peek through the bushes, through the little poplars that are put around as a wall of the wigwam, and I saw piercing, a man that we knew. Make story short, that after that weekend, that Sunday, we went back to the residential school. School was happening till the end of June in those days. The priests invited us all into the chapel, the boys. Okay, who went to the Sundance? And my cousins. So we were punished. We were forced to go into the confessional. And the priest gave me a lecture. He says, "You have worshipped false gods. This is pagan. This is wrong. You're going to do 2 rosaries. That's 106 Hail Marys." And I was flabbergasted. 16. Even when I went to Rome, I still this moment, and I was angry. Never really knew that as well. So, there were trajectories of colonialism like that was forced upon me, but it never deterred me from understanding what Western aesthetics were, and I was attracted by them because I was interested in being a good painter.
Tell me about, I guess, I'm torn, the Park Flesh is
Yes.
a beautiful series. Can you speak to that one, Robert?
Yeah. I'd left the museum in 82, and came to Toronto. Up to that point, I had been borrowing from everybody. It was, but before that, when I was at the museum, stress, I guess, I had, not knowing, I had moved into a haunted house on Hawthorne in Ottawa when I was a curator at the museum. Didn't know that. And I was given a show by the Pollock Gallery, so I was drawing. I was doing drawings, so I was working as well, and I had a research day, and I used my research day to draw drawings for the show here in Toronto. But back in Ottawa and in my house, I began dreaming again. I would wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, wake up sweating, just nervous, and my eyes would focus, and there would be a figure standing at my bedroom door. And as soon as I would focus my eyes, it would disappear. And this went on for about a month, and it began to wear my body. And everybody was dying that had appeared. And so I called my mother. I said, well, she said, you'll have to come. The shaman who operates through dreams that our family goes to, he says, he wants you to come, and he'll heal you. And so I did what he was told. What I was told to do was put a paper by your bed and draw the face as soon as it's happened. So I did. There were about 4 of them. And took them home. We went to see him. And of course he had to go to sleep. So, but when I was there, he put his hands over them, slowly, on all of them. And I knew that I would not get an answer that day or that night. So 2 nights later, I'm sleeping at home, in my room, at the house, and I slowly woke up and I realized somebody had penetrated my brain. It was just so obvious. I just woke up slowly, and I just got, for like a second or two, I got really angry, and I said, what have I done to myself? I have exposed myself to something I had no idea. You know, I felt that I had submitted myself, and you know, being a very rational person, having gone to university and just really like, you know, liking Mondrian and stuff like that. And I said, what have I done? Anyways, I couldn't go back to sleep, so I get up and I said, what am I going to do? I'll go get a glass of water. So I got out of my room, go to the kitchen, and my mother hears me, and she comes and she sits down. Kibaochige, that's the same thing. And as in breakfast time, you're dreaming? And I said, Minanga, yes. Aben, sit down. I will English. She says, okay, so what is it? What is it? I said, I don't know. He said, are you scared? And I said, no, I'm not scared, but I almost got angry. She said, go on. You're being healed, you're being cured. And you know who it is. And I said, yes, I know who it is. You know, it's the guy we went to see. Don't want to mention his name. And he's dead now. And anyways, never had problems with my dreams since that time. It's just, you know, and I trusted this man as well. You know, it's a man we always went to see. And he was also a man that taught me medicine, you know, and he was a lovely man. He was married to one of my cousins, so it was part of family. But I got off track here about your original question. Purpose. So, what happened is I came to Toronto. I had to find my own path. I had to find my own way of creating. I have to find my own mojo, if you know, for lack of a better word right now. I was tired. I was tired of borrowing from. I could be inspired, but I can't just copy. I just, you know, it's time, and it's time to get a hold of my culture, where I come from, especially spiritual, because that's beginning to play a very important part in my work. That's when I went and bought handmade paper. advertisements, handmade paper from India, bra, and took acrylic, took porcupine quills, and I wanted to, for the first time, I wanted to marry indigenous spirituality, my culture, and modern art practice. So I pulled them to create a square. And I remember as a child, Mum calling this man to name us. And he would open his parfleche, and inside were amulet, rattle, and the windows would be closed. So he would go into a trance with his rattle, and he would talk to various people, to the name givers or the spirit people, spirit guardians, and all of a sudden you could tell by his conversation, somebody was ready to give a name to the child. And he would laugh with them. And then for the first time he would utter the name of the child, and then it would pass around and you repeat the name of the child. And this is what inspired my parfleches for the Last Supper. My grandfather and my father raised us to believe that Jesus was a shaman, and so were the people at the Last Supper. They had all their own powers. I had learned through Barnett Newman, Stations of the Cross. He was of Jewish faith. I had been raised by the nuns and priests not to touch that. It was sacred. And I said to myself, well, if he could do it, I can do it. So that I began to craft, I began to articulate in my brain what it could be. So that's when I made parfleches for the Last Supper, based on the parfleches. Parfleches there were two uses for them. One for carrying pemmican on a horse, and there were usually two, because that's how many you can make out of one hide. But some of them were also made a little differently, and they were medicine bags. So hence, and I read the Bible, read the quotes, because I've always been interested in verse. And that was in 1984 or 5. And it took 4 years to sell them, because there were 13 of them. And I had to read about the lives of each of those 13 people, and they all died violently. For example, Bartholomew was flaked in Armenia, and others, they all died violently. It was very interesting, because I didn't know who they were. I tried to refer to Da Vinci's Last Supper, but in some of the writings on it, the literature, it didn't identify all of them. I had to go to an earlier one. I never realized that there was an earlier painting, an Italian artist. I don't know, it was from the Trecento as opposed to a Quattrocento. It starts with a D, I can't remember. But he painted the Last Supper as well. And I started reading. And I started reading the first four Gospels, and they became the script, because each of those parfleches for the Last Supper has a quote in them. A quote like, for example, if they have loved you, if they hated you, they have hated me before. Something like that, you know. And it was very cathartic. Nobody would buy them, and but I didn't want. Everybody wanted to buy one or two of them, but there was that number. They're very superstitious, but I went along with it in the sense that I said, okay, but I'm not going to break them out. And eventually, somebody bought them and donated them to the Winnipeg Art Gallery, because it would be close to home. You know, so parfleches, yeah. I still work on that thing a lot. and it has translated lately in the last 10 years into diptychs, just a folding of and this was the first time I also used, this was the most trying part. I started to use indigenous material like quills. I began to find out more and more about the habits of the porcupine. And oh yeah, and not only, and also the prickling from the quills, animism. And there was an aspect, because of being a Catholic altar boy, this was very difficult terrain, but I did it. It needed to be done. And from that time on, that was my first work that was essentially mine. And I created them here on Wellesley and Sugar. Wellesley and Sugar.
I want to pick up on something you said a few minutes ago, Robert. And I was intrigued by it because I was going to ask how you see the relationship between material and image in your work. And you were talking about materiality a few minutes ago, the porcupine. And I hadn't thought of the porcupine as a living thing apart from its quills when we come to the use of the quills. So I was kind of struck by that, and I was thinking, would it be fair to say that that when we talk about in a binary sort of structure, the relationship between material and idea as though they were opposites, that in fact maybe they're not opposites, that the idea is embodied in the material and the material in the idea, and so it's hard for us in the Western paradigm to acknowledge that. And I was wondering if that's something that when we talk about materiality in your work, whether that's something that is part of your
That's a very it's a very interesting question. Ian. I think in many ways, I'll try to answer that because I will start off by creating a phrase there, not a phrase, but indigenous materiality. Okay, and because I'll give you an example of one, not the quilt, but I can come back to that. For example, in terms of indigenous material, the canoe. Pollution is destroying its physicality, its strength. You can't do birch biting very very anymore because the texture of the bark has changed because of pollution. So so that we are now just dealing with that ourselves as artists, as indigenous artists who use indigenous material. Like for example, the first time and in many ways it relates to the use of quills. It's a natural material. The thing about barflashes for the Last Supper was the combination of acrylic and a synthetic, and then to use a natural material, and putting them together was quite a paradigm, was quite an experience, And I deliberately put those in use together at the same time to try to deal without any kind of articulation to materials. One is synthetic, because like I said, one is natural. And I had dealt with through Mondrian, like I said earlier, there's no right angles really, if there are any in nature. It's all organic. And I begin to see these not so much dichotomies because they are part of the physical world, you know, and one is made, one is not made, you know, and I found the first time I ever used after the quills, 85, around 1989, I used a cow skull. I covered it with wax and caustic, and paint, and attach things to it, like ribbons and man-made stuff as well. That's when I came the closest to animism. It brought me to a shamanistic creative activity. I wasn't aware of it. I mean, I could feel it, but I wasn't interested in it. Now I live in here in the studio with a sacred buffalo skull. I can deal with it. I'm not comfortable. It's been slow to try to integrate or articulate or use this shamanistic background that I have. And I'm more and more comfortable with it because I know what the other side, I know the rationale, even abstraction now, I'm beginning to articulate our abstraction from abstraction within my own culture, you know, and that comes, although abstraction does exist, it's practiced in the traditional way more by women than by men. Men are more realistic. They will draw something or paint something that is a narrative, a story, like on teepees. Another thing about abstraction that I recently found, and I used to teach this quite a bit at OCAD, Faye Hebershiel, an artist from Calgary, Blood. I went to visit her, and we went into Calgary, an antique store, and I saw a set of 10 photographs printed in 1907 by the Department of Agriculture, and it was of a gathering of Blackfoot people in 1907 in Fort McLeod. There were 10 postcards, beautiful postcards. I couldn't afford them. They were over $200. They were pink, good production, and they were good images. So we left, and then as we left the store, she says to me, "Oh, I forgot something." So I said, "Could you wait for me here?" And so I was sitting outside on a bench. There was a bench outside the store, and I waited there. She was there for a bit, and then I got up, and then she comes out, and she hands me this envelope. And they came in an envelope. She hands it in another envelope and said, "Here, this is, thank you for coming to my territory." And I opened it, and there they were. And I used them in my premises for self-rule. One of the first photographs in that was medicine lodges. What they are, Ian, is teepees, a whole bunch of them, 4 or 5 of them, I don't remember, but they're there. They're medicine lodges. What they are is inside of them, on a tripod, are medicine bundles, and medicine bundles are living things for us. I left. That's one of the reasons why I left the museum. I left the museum just to go off track a bit, and that accentuates what I'm going to say. This same guy that bought my painting for $90, he had an office across the street. I got friendly with him. He specialized in Plains culture, just my backyard. And so he would share a lot of information with me, and then he shared this story with me about the shaman in Alberta who had this medicine bottle, and his children were hardcore Roman Catholics, his children. And he was afraid that they were going to be molested, you know. And so he confided in Ted, and Ted said, we'll take care of it for you, the National Museum. So we brought it into the acquisition as a permanent loan. And he showed it to me. He didn't open it, of course. Gave me the catalog number, and I looked a little bit of the notes on the catalog card. And the day, about a month before I left, and this was really hit when I resigned. I used to have to walk through the collection room. There was these big tables where ethnologists, scientists, other people, curators would be looking at stuff, and they would just be lying there. This time there was one in the corner, large table, and this young woman, she was introduced to me, she was an ethno-chemist. One day I walked by, hi, and she'd opened that particular medicine. I looked at the card, looked at the number, and went back to the entries. Sure enough, it was that one. She was examining the chemical structure of things that were in that medicine, a living thing in this sacrilegious. And I said to myself, I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. It's not a place for me. I wasn't angry. I just knew because of where I come from. I gotta get out of here. So these kind of things began to play a very important role in terms of how I placed myself within the larger society. There was still always that element, and it's not easy all the time to work with that. So I knew when I found out about the medicine lodges and the medicine. But one is the most interesting thing about the medicine lodges, the skirts. The doors, there are no doors. The doors are painted. They're abstract portals. What they do is they lift the skirt of the, they lift the skirt, and then they bring the tripod, and then with the medicine bundle hanging on it, and they follow the sun all around, and as they go around they lift the skirt of the teepee. And all of them, because there were like 5, 6 of them, and there were medicine bundles for each shaman that was present. And I use that to explain these portals of abstraction, you know. And I do the same thing about living thing, a medicine bundle being a living thing as an abstraction, you know. So, and that also goes to the notion of the parfleche as well.
Nice.
And that also deals with material, you know, because the material is actually given a redefinition by its shamanistic significance.
I want to shift gears a little bit, Robert, to the question of discourse in the art system that we occupy, of course. And I'm wondering, partly thinking about what you've been talking about, partly thinking about what we know about I don't know, contemporary art. I'm kind of curious what your views might be on, to put it bluntly, what's happening today, but let's say using the German word Zeitgeist, or the idea of the dominant discourse. Do you feel that there is something that you might find within the contemporary culture that we occupy that could be called a dominant discourse or a Zeitgeist, and how you might find yourself in relating to that?
Oh, definitely. I think performance art has given it a texture, not, I wouldn't say relevance, it's always been there, right? But performance, I think, because performing is a kind of a ritual, you know? And even today, artists will actually talk. I'll give you a personal example. I don't do it as much now here, but when I had a studio on Spadina, I would arrive, I would meditate to try to, and I learned it from Norval Morrisseau. He said to me, he says, Nietzsche, which means brother, living in a city, living in a country prairie, all the bombardment, all the stimuli, all the different things, visuals, sound, anything, people, cultures, languages, philosophies, religions, everything, they're all, and not only that, something I learned from Daphne Ogier, wires, telephone wires, they interfere with your dreams. Because when I went to see Daphne Ogier, when I was at the museum, I was sent to Winnipeg to make the tours. And this is when I met Morrisseau as well. Daphne said to me, says, so tell me, I'm a young curator and I'm just curious. She says, how do you feel like, what's it like living in Winnipeg? Because she's lived in Manitoulin. Oh, she takes me upstairs, to her studio, and she points outside the window at her studio. She says, I have a lot of problems with my dreaming. And I said, why? She says, look at them. All these wires, they interfere with. See, well, I hope I'm and Norval said the same thing, not the same words, but Norval said to me, he said, Robert, I have difficulty concentrating because there are so many things. He had a word for it. He said, there is too much mental garbage in the city. And I said to myself, now I wonder what that means. But I quickly sort of surmised what he meant. Eventually I used that. And when I would go to my studio, how do I clear my mind up? How do I put myself in a level of consciousness where I would meditate? When I arrived at the studio, I would practice breathing, a Buddhist, and I would bring my Buddha there, and I would put on my position, and I would breathe. I learned it in Montreal, with Katie Mallett. She used to run the jazz program on the CBC radio. I went to McGill with her, and she once introduced me to that, and I put it aside. But as I became more and more mature in my practice, and I wanted to clear my head so that I could actually paint, and that's how I began. I concentrated to paint Premises for Self-Rule, these 5 paintings that I had done with paint and image. The title actually came from a course that I took over by Tom Dean. The title of his course was Paint and Image. And yeah, sorry.
So I'm getting the understanding that that one approaches these practices through the lens of performance, and that in the current climate, current dominant discourse, if you might use that term, that performativity or performance is central to that.
I think it's absolutely crucial, and it varies as much as there are various artists. There are different ways that artists do that. They have different bodies, they have different experiences, they have different ambitions, they have different ideas, and they have different metabolism. But you act out how you mix your paints, how you position things. These are all rituals, and I find those secularly very, very, very important. And in the end, too, psychologically, it's quite useful,
That reminds me, this is a bit of an aside, but I'm reminded of something you said in respect to Baumgarten's frieze at the AGO, and your demur that that what Baumgarten didn't understand was the importance of speech over the written word, that the naming of things is grounded in speech, not in Western written words. Would you see the question of speech as one aspect of this question of performativity?
I think absolutely, because speech actually is an articulation from your body, right? It's not just movement, but it's also sound. And I think, yeah, it's intrinsic in many ways to the notion of performance. You know, I'm not a singer, I don't, but at my age now, I talk to myself and give you a new example that I just discovered in 2006. After my residency in Paris, when I created Paris Ojibwa. Right here on this wall, and these paintings that are inside here, I had begun to draw them and I couldn't place them. I knew they were ghosts, I knew they were spirits, I knew that they were helpers, etc., etc. And I would be in constant conversation with my family because they all speak this kind of thing. So I had brought them back here from Paris, where they died, and here, and in term through art, and I just could not place them where I had brought them to. They were here. I could feel them the moment I draw the first drawing, I began to weep. I had brought their spirit home. But the question became, where do I place them? So I placed them in a photograph that I had taken when my grandfather, and it's next to the cemetery. It's a marsh. It's between the graveyard, the marsh, and Lake Manitoba, facing east. I took a photograph of that, and it became my guide towards placing. But it wasn't that was not enough. Not that physical memory of that place and the connection. It was the sound. I learned to talk to myself, but not in English. I spoke to myself. Right away. I knew right away what was happening. And time later, as I was finishing the work, I began to realize that I had decolonized my body, my voice, because after that point, I was always thinking in English when I was painting. This time, I spoke in my mother tongue, and that was, I constantly learned something in trying to do the best I can in creating something. And Paris Ojibwa and painting, trying to place them, having made a transatlantic presence here. I said, so what do I do? So I began to speak to myself in my language, and sure enough, smooth sailing, confidence, and I also knew that I'd done the right thing, and they were facing east because the resurrection, and they were Methodists. They were praying when they went there.
How can I be authentic? It is an almost ancient modernist question, of course.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that it links both the traditions that you speak to and the Western tradition, which you also speak to. How can I be authentic? When I hear you just speaking about this question of speech and sound, and this bringing something back, as it were, I understand that I'm hearing something about the authentic. Would you, if I put the question to you, Robert, how do you understand this question of how can I be authentic, or what is authenticity? Would it make sense?
I think it was in all what I've just immediately said. The fact that I was speaking to myself, that I was speaking in another language, in my original language, the first language I ever spoke as a babe, first spoke. That sound is very real. I can describe things much more fully, and also penetrate spirituality much more fully, quickly, fully, and much more rewardingly. If I am to speak in my maternal language, and I think that's part, for me anyways, my experience of authenticity, and also memory of ritual, actual ritual, but also at the same time, again, even just a daily ritual of going to your studio, opening the door and putting this and deciding what you're going to do, how are you going to use it, all of those things, you know. I think that for me gives the reality to what I try to do as a painter. I don't consider what I do, the fact that I will paint in oils, the fact that I do only paintings, I will not make objects, you know. I'd like to, I have, but you know, it's not my tea. I don't know. It becomes more and more of a very fundamental question of that. What is authentic for me? What is authentic? If you come from, if you are articulating the notion of creating art, well, it's in, for me, I have found it in language. It's a different language from English or French or any European language. For example, the misconception that we have no word for indigenous languages, don't have a word, especially First Nations languages, know that we don't have a word for art. That's not true, you know. Mazini Chige, image maker, you know. For example, our translation of film is masnate se, moving images, you know. Just and also art to craft something, be it photography, be it filming, be it sculpture, be it making a painting. Mazini Chige, the act of drawing, the act of creating, the act of constructing, the acting of putting together. Now that's that. It's not as it's actually more rational than the notion of creation. You know, it's making. You know, I mean, I think in the end, once something has been made, it's creation. But it had to come from somewhere, and that's what's important. Where it has come from. Well, of course, it's come from within your own body.
I have one last question. Thinking about that, art can be a form of nuance, a form of subtlety, a form of what I might even call it comedy.
Yep.
As much as it can be a form of critique,
Yes.
a form of drama or tragedy. I'm kind of curious, Robert, in your own approach to your work, do you find that, because it is so nuanced, do you find that there is an edge of comedy that you understand as an important imperative in the work, or would you say that would be a misnomer?
Comedy, for me, not really. I'll give you an example. And again, it's body. 2008, there was an apology for the residential. I spent 12 years in residential school, elementary from grade 1 to grade 8 on my reserve, grade 9 to grade 12 in Winnipeg, a high school, again, a residential school. But the one on my reserve, 7 years old and get picked up. And forbidden. Line up this, line to get a number. I had a very, very, very traumatic experience in my elementary residential school on my reserve. I was bullied, I was abused in all forms. So were my parents. Didn't know that I carried that as well. 2008, the day before I went to Ottawa for the apology of Harper, the Parliament, Ian, I'm walking back and forth here. I'm going to Ottawa the next day. And I had this, I'd never remembered, okay? I'm walking, I felt dirty, I felt ashamed, because it was, somehow I felt that something was going to happen. Something. I knew it, I feel it, I could feel it. So I was in Ottawa, nothing. I mean, I'm glad that I went. It was cathartic in so many different ways, but superficially too as well, you know. And the next year, I go home to my reserve and I'm in a wake. I shake hands with a woman that goes to all of the things, only to remember, she was about 5 years, 6 years older than me. Her husband was my bully, was my abuser, never knew that. But that night, after I shook hands with her, it all came. When I got off the plane to come here, came home, put my luggage on. Paul is sitting over there, my partner. I said, Paul, I've got to tell you something. I found out this is what happened to me. And I said, I'm going to find out more. I'm going to spend the next month. This was in August 1st. I said, I'm going to spend 24 days. Each day I'm going to draw. I'm going to remember trauma. I fear, every time I would remember an incident, I could feel the trauma. I would, more than trauma, I would actually relive the fear. 24 of them, residential school drawings. And I said to myself, before doing that, I said to myself, how can I do that? I said, oh yeah, I teach students at OCAD to remember things. You know? I said, I'm going to remember. So what I would do is, I would move the bed. The next day, a brand new sheet of paper. Okay, move the bed. I would find out who the abuser was, who the person in authority was, who knew what was going on. And I would also remember the little boys that would come in the dormitory in September. Little ones, like 7 years old, 8 years old. Our dormitory, my bed is there, and they're over there, and all in a row, of course, weeping at night. I drew that. Weeping at night. We were not allowed to go and comfort them. And I lived through all of that, and I can sleep without the light on now. I had always had this anger, this trauma, this memory locked up. You know what? I'm very happy now. Really, really happy. You know? And I realized that I share that with my sisters because, you know, they talk about it now too, more of the, and now the men on my reserve are coming out. They're telling their stories. And our father was one of those people that was experimented with. He would get half a glass of milk. They were experimenting on vitamins on the children. But am I angry? No. No, I'm not. One of the hardest things for me to do was to find another word for forgiveness, because it doesn't exist in our language. The only word that we could come up with is two words, it's the same root. Bagitten, let it go. Bagitten, let your mind go of it. That's the closest epistemological thing we have about forgiveness. And therefore also you don't judge. The Christian God judges, yes, but the Creator only listens to you. And these are things now that I have at my age, I am very, very comfortable to hold. And I feel very happy and very proud of that. Thank God I'm not, I could have been worse, you know. And I'm so happy that I have the opportunity to share that with you. And yes.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.